Hello and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Cabling Installation and Maintenance. Today's event is entitled Non-Compliant Cable, Understanding the Risks and Avoiding Liability, and will be presented by Todd Harpel, Director of Marketing and Product Management with Berktech, who will present on behalf of the Communications Cable and Connectivity Association. Also Natalia Medley, a counsel with the law firm Crowell & Mooring, and Steve Gallen, Business Development Director with Underwriters Laboratories. The event is being sponsored by the CCCA, Crowell & Mooring, and UL. My thanks go to these organizations for sponsoring today's webcast and for presenting the information that you'll see and hear today. Today's presentations will provide three perspectives on the issue of non-compliant cable being sold, bought, and installed into networks today. There are certainly some compelling questions in the queue. We're going to get to as many of them as we can after the delivery of our third and final presentation today, which will be delivered by Steve Gallen of UL, talking about labeling and marks for telecom cables. So, Steve, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Patrick. Again, my name is Steve Gallen with Underwriters Laboratories as the Wire and Cable Business Development Director. My portion of this webinar will focus on the components around properly labeled and marked telecom cable. For those purchasing, specifying, installing, inspecting telecom cables, hopefully the information which I will provide in the next few minutes will help you to identify a properly labeled and marked telecom cable. First, for background information, the products on this slide are what we commonly refer to as telecom cables. They are your typical communications cables such as type CM, CMP, CMR, which are was the focus of the CCCA investigation. You also have the CM, the CMX types, power limited circuit cables such as CL2, CL2P, CL2R, CL2X, etc., community antenna TV cable, data processing cable, power limited, non-power limited fire alarm cable, instrumentation tray cable, network power, broadband communications cable, and optical fiber cable. Next to each of the products noted on this slide are the standards covering those products. You may have recalled Todd referencing UL 444. There are other standards which cover some of these other products that are considered telecom cables. I provide them here just for your reference, nothing more. When looking for a properly labeled and marked cable, one needs to understand the information surface printed on the cable as well as what is required to be included on a label attached to the carton, reel, box, or smallest unit container. For a cable to be considered listed by UL, it needs to be correctly surface printed as well as correctly labeled on the container. UL symbol on the product and the listing mark of UL on the attached tag, reel, or the smallest unit container in which the product is packaged is the only method provided by UL to identify products manufactured under its listing and follow-up services. This information is contained on what is called a UL guide card covering many of the wire and cable categories of cables, including the ones mentioned in the previous slide. You may find these guide cards on the UL website at www.ul.com. If one or both cable surface printing or container label are missing, or if the information differs from what we will review in the next few slides, be suspicious. Let's first take a look at the surface marking of a telecom cable. This example is typical of a cable that is both UL listed for safety as well as UL verified for performance. And remember, Todd had mentioned previously that the verification portion, the CAT 5E in this case, is optional. The information does not necessarily have to be in the exact order, but a properly surface printing would have a company's file number or E number, as it is commonly called, and or the company name. The UL in parentheses, which is called the UL symbol, and then the type designation. In this case, we have a type CMP, 4-pair, 24 gauge, 75 degree C rated cable. If the cable has also been UL verified for performance, then as you can see, the words verified, UL in parentheses, and the category level which was verified, in this case, category 5E. Next, we'll talk about the box. Now, there was a box that was shown previously in Todd's slide, and it had the UL and circle, and that's not a listed product. It's not a product that has the proper marking on it. Hopefully we will today clear up some of the questions around that. So the box, the reel, the smallest unit container, etc., is required to bear the UL holographic label. It's a unique label that was introduced for all telecom cables and was effective in October of 2010. These holographic labels offer a much higher level of security over the paper labels which they replaced. Now, the holographic label, just for reference, is in addition to any technical or engineering information which a cable producer may want to include on their packaging. For instance, the type designation, gauge, pair count, temperature ratings, etc. The holographic labels have gone through an evolution since 1996, when they were first introduced by UL in select product categories. They have various layers of overt and covert security, including color-shifting ink, similar to that used in U.S. paper currency. The holographic labels have a repeating pattern of floating UL symbols with distinctive burst patterns around one of the floating UL symbols and detailed microprinting and wavy lines. And although today's holographic labels are quite different than those introduced in 1996, the same theme exists, and that is to stay one step ahead of those individuals trying to capitalize on selling non-compliant products. I'm not sure how well this photographs, but hopefully you can see that here is a typical label for a listed communications cable. Let's go over a couple of the components that are on this label. The C to the left of the UL in the circle located at the top left quadrant of the label means that the product is listed to requirements in Canada. Doesn't always have to be there, but if it is, you can make the judgment that it was also evaluated to the requirements in Canada. The US to the right of that UL would mean that it was evaluated to the requirements of the United States. Okay. The designations in the center, the number SJ443034, that's what we call a unique issue number. It's unique to this tag. It's unique to this label. It's unique to a particular manufacturer. It's used for purposes of traceability. If there's questions in the future, we have that label. We can trace it back to see exactly who that label was provided to, who purchased that label, and it gives us a way of tracing a cable back to its origin. The 1000 in the lower right quadrant is simply the number of feet contained on the reel, container, etc. And finally, in the top right quadrant of the label, you will see a UL with the U and the L having different colored backgrounds. More on this in a moment. But first, I just want to show you a label which is both listed for safety and verified for performance. Remember in an earlier slide we showed the surface printing for both a listed and verified cable. You should make sure that if the cable is surface marked with the verification reference to UL, then this label must be used. You can see in the center, it just not only says communications cable, it says also verified to UL performance category program. If the cable is listed by UL but not verified by UL, then the previous label is the one that should be used. If you're still not sure about the legitimacy of the cable, UL has developed an authenticator to be used with the labels to reveal the color shifting ink. What I am showing you now is the newest generation of the holographic technology. That is where the U and the L have different colored backgrounds. There may still be the last generation of labels in the marketplace. They had both the U and the L with the same colored background. For the older version, should you pass the authenticator over the mark, the UL will appear and then disappear. For this newest generation, the UL background will change color as you move the authenticator across the UL. Each is perfectly acceptable, and both will be available in the marketplace in the near term. Customers are depleting their supply of the old generation labels, and when they reorder labels, we are issuing the new generation. Cable marked with one should not be considered to be better or safer than one marked with the other technology. So how can I get my hands on one of these cards, you might ask? They are the size of a credit card, so they're very easy to carry with you. They may be ordered online at ul.com/marks. You can then choose the label order form tab and enter the Authenticator part number, which is 1000-S0132. Or you can call any of our local or any of our label centers listed on that website. For those that are planning to visit Bixby in Orlando in 2 weeks, please stop by the UL booth. We should have an ample supply, and we'll be happy to provide them to you, as well as answer any questions which you may have. In the last few minutes, I would like to briefly explain that this is not just a rigorous test program that is required of manufacturers to achieve the ability to use the UL symbol and holographic label on their products, but is also a continuous monitoring program. UL program requires factory surveillance, or what we call our follow-up program. This portion of the program requires that UL field representatives visit each manufacturer a minimum of 4 times per year, but usually more, and it's based on their production. Product from production is tested at the factory, with additional testing conducted at one of UL's major testing facilities. Samples are also randomly selected in the marketplace, where we then conduct at the UL lab unique analytical testing, which requires a short length of cable. It's about 15 feet, which may be able to discriminate cables which do not have sufficient greens to pass the required large-scale fire test. I mentioned a couple of times the Plenum riser test, to name 2 of them. If those results are still not conclusive, we may also secure larger lengths of cable, usually in 1,000 feet of cable, from the marketplace to conduct the actual large-scale fire test. For those cable manufacturers that are found to have questionable results at either their factory or from the marketplace, corrective action is taken. This action, in very severe instances, could result in a public notice, and in some instances, a manufacturer may have his complete file withdrawn, which would make him ineligible to bear the symbol and mark on the product. And finally, it is important that we try to reach out to the entire supply chain to help understand this topic, and that's one of the venues is this webinar today. UL works and will continue to work with the authorities having jurisdictions, distributors, and so on. We look for opportunities in trade publications as well as speaking opportunities to get the word out there and explain to people what a properly marked cable and carton package looks like. And we use public notices when appropriate. And we constantly review on a regular basis and make enhancements to the program as necessary. So in closing, I would like to remind everyone, always look for a properly marked cable, and that the UL symbol is on the cable. It must also have the UL holographic listing mark on the container. UL does require from the manufacturers that if a cable is no longer eligible for UL certification, that the cable manufacturer must remove the symbol from the surface printing of the cable. And thank you for your attention. I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Steve, thanks very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks to all of our presenters today for their presentations, and to the members of the audience as well. Many of you found the question window and submitted questions. Thanks also to Todd Harpel, who I know that many of you who submitted questions during Todd's presentation have received answers directly to you from answers to those questions. So thanks very much for that. I would like to take the first bit of this Q&A with Natalia, if I could. Some of the more, as you might imagine, some of the more compelling and urgent questions came from a legal standpoint, from a number of different perspectives. So if we could spend some of this Q&A time with Natalia, and then perhaps get some Q&A with the other presenters just before we wrap up as well. Natalia, if you're ready, I do have a few questions to send your way.
Okay.
And thanks again to everybody who submitted questions. There are a great number of them lined up. I'm going to try to sort of condense the essential thoughts into a few questions, send them Natalia's way, and hopefully that will address a bulk of the questions that came in. So, Natalia, to summarize questions the intent or the theme of questions that came in from a number of contractors. Several contractors submitted questions with a tone sort of concern about their potential liability, and the essence of their stance seems to be, I'm a contractor. If I buy cable in good faith, and the organization that sold the cable to me told me that it is code compliant, NEC compliant, can I still be held liable, or is my sort of act of good faith in the purchase enough to insulate me from such liability?
Right. So, again, I always have to start with a disclaimer of it depends on the case. But in general, the way this works, and again, today I was speaking just to potential contractor installer liability, but the way this typically works is, yes, liability may be found as to the eventual, as to the contractor, if you're being sued by someone who owns a building or someone who is harmed by non-compliant cable. But that being said, there are causes of action that typically would be then available to the contractor to then go back and assert a claim against the distributor, especially in many cases, you may have your own fraud cause of action against the distributor depending on the terms of the agreement. But, it does depend on the situation. So what representations were made. It depends on any existing contract or agreement between a distributor and a contractor, and many other factors. But in terms of, we're talking about tort liability, a contractor may still be found liable as to the plaintiff, but then may be able to either institute a separate action to recover that money and other money from the distributor who sold the non-compliant cable, or to bring that distributor in and say, hey, plaintiff, you've sued me, but I'm really not the person at fault here. It's the distributor. In that case, the court will have the opportunity to determine liability as to all the parties that are in that action. So while it's not a magic bullet, it doesn't make liability go away, it is available as a defense and is an issue that in many cases in many jurisdictions will have to be determined depending on the facts of the case and what the court decides.
Thanks, Natalia. And sorry to throw this curveball at you right here and now, but as you were giving that explanation, a thought occurred to me that may be salient for the members of the audience. When you talked about a contractor's potential course of action against a distributor in a scenario that's not entirely a hypothetical scenario, not just necessarily made up. If that distributor is in the form of a so-and-so.com whose incorporation or whose business is located in some far-flung area of the world, not necessarily the country. Again, sorry to put you on the spot if I'm doing that, but does that lessen the likelihood, or might that lessen the likelihood of a contractor's success in seeking damages against such a distributor?
Yeah, again, I would say in general terms, obviously depends on each case, but yes. And
sure.
the issue we see there are a few issues, but one being, because the laws are what they are in other jurisdictions and other countries, may be different than here. It's in many countries, it's easier for a .com or a manufacturer to sort of set up shop, produce things and sell them, and then sort of go away and not be able to answer to a legal cause of action. But another point here, more on the legal side of things, is the issue of a foreign manufacturer or a foreign distributor, their ability to be sued in the United States, so in terms of personal jurisdiction. And that's a complicated issue. It's evolving. The Supreme Court just decided a case relating to this last year, so it's something that's constantly being considered. But, the case last year limited jurisdiction over foreign manufacturers and foreign entities that may be sued in the United States, especially in this particular case we were talking about consumer products. But it is something that, although in theory those distributors or manufacturers, and I say manufacturers because I know in many of these cases that's a concern, while they may in theory be able to sue, while people in the United States may have a cause of action against those people in the supply chain or those entities in the supply chain, in reality it may be very difficult to actually recover any money or to actually bring them into an action in the U.S. And I know, for instance, too, in places like, people have been dealing with China on not just, cable issues, but involving lots of other consumer product and lots of other product issues. There's a lot of roadblocks and barriers to actually being able to bring a Chinese company into an action in the United States.
Thank you. A follow-up question that's sort of along those lines came into us from, I think, another part of the supply chain, specifically from the distribution standpoint, and that question was, in a scenario that's, again, not entirely made up, a non-compliant cable is typically available for sale at a far lower than market price, and a contractor who's been buying cable for some period of a professional career likely would recognize, a significant discount in price versus what might be expected or what has been historically the case. And the question essentially asks, if that becomes the case, does a contractor then open him or herself up to liability by virtue of having purchased a far below market price cable, even though, like you answered in the first question, it says code compliant right on it. I did my due diligence. Well, does buying it at a supreme discount sort of put a chink in that armor?
Right. So when we're talking about building codes or even breach of warranty, which is really in many cases based in contract, for those types of liability, it doesn't matter so much when it's usually just a matter of whether or not, just bottom line, whether or not the cable complies. But in the case of tort, in particular negligence, it does matter, yes. And you may, if you purchase, and again I speak generally in terms of what the law typically says, and you have to consult particular states' laws and case law on this. But in general, for a negligence cause of action, I went in and started talking about the duty issue, and that's where this is relevant. So even if a cable, if a non-compliant cable is marked UL or whatever other listing, it may be a false mark, but if a contractor sees that and just relies on that, but purchases at a lower price, so therefore maybe arousing suspicion that it may not be actually compliant, that is typically admissible in a torts action, in a negligence action, to establish duty of care. And what that means is that it's a big picture. The court, the jury, will look at all the factors that went into the purchase and the due diligence in purchasing that particular cable, and will then consider, well, what would a reasonable contractor have done or had thought in these circumstances, and then that may be where a court or a jury may say, well, a reasonable contractor acting in these circumstances would say, hey, that's cheap, that's a cheap price, and therefore there may be some red flags in terms of whether or not that's actually compliant cable. Now, that being said, that's not true in every case. Again, it's a case-by-case situation. It depends on the court, the jury. It depends on the circumstances and the real extent of the due diligence. But this type of industry knowledge or this type of concern, that everyone or that many people may have with cable that's priced at a certain price point or sold from a certain distributor or whatever it may be, then that in many cases is admissible to sort of go towards that determination of whether there's been negligence.
Thank you, Natalia. One more question for you, and it comes from sort of the final piece of the supply chain, if you will, that being the end user organization. And again, I'll try to summarize. In a scenario in which an end user, it turns out that non-compliant cable was installed in the building or premises of an end user, and the user finds that out, but there is no other event. In other words, there's no catastrophic fire that results in other damage. That the presence of non-compliant cable is the situation in and of itself, and the user organization becomes aware of that the cable that's installed is non-compliant. Right. Can the user then take some action, or is there another event that sort of has to trigger the opportunity for the user to take the legal action against whoever it is down the line?
Right. So in general, again, in most cases or in the prevailing law of jurisdiction, for tort actions, so for fraud or for negligence actions, as we've discussed, there has to be some additional event. So there has to be additional damages. It can't just be the fact that, it usually cannot be just the fact that non-compliant cable is there that then gives rise to a tort action, because there's a separate requirement that independent damages be established. So that's that category. That being said, in the case of the building codes and in many cases of warranties, because there it's really about the economic loss and the sort of safety concerns in the case of the building codes. In those situations, there would be potential, or there may be potential liability, because it's not, in most cases, required that an additional level of damage be proved. So that's something to look out for there. Now, I say additional liability, obviously, in the case of a building code violation. If you have, a property owner or somebody, they won't be able to bring a cause of action based on building codes in all jurisdictions. That's pretty limited. Some states allow it. Not all of them do. So it's something, again, you'd want to watch out for. But they may be able to, barring anything like a fire or further damage, just the existence of the cable, non-compliant cable, a property owner or someone like that who has standing may be able to bring a breach of warranty or a breach of contract action without any further damage being shown.
Natalia, thanks very much. Thanks for all of that information. And Steve, if we have you on the line, thanks very much. I think you pulled up what is actually the proper slide that I was trying for the past minute to pull up. And a few questions came in, Steve, if we do still have you on the line, about this URL that you referred to. And I apologize because I'm not even sure of the crux of all the questions, but I know that some questions did come in. If I could ask you to reiterate what you stated in this slide as sort of the resource for our audience who wish to take advantage of this site that you offer.
Okay, the ordering of the UL Authenticator?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I did receive a couple of questions. I think I've answered them individually. If you're looking to locate the UL Authenticator, you go on to www.ul.com/marks. When you get to that page, I believe on the left-hand side, you will find a label order form. You click on that, and once the form is up, the part number for that authenticator is the number that is on the screen. It's 1000-S0132. There should also be label centers phone numbers there. As an option, you can call one of those label centers, and they'd be glad to provide you with the authenticators.
Steve, thanks very much, and I want to thank everybody who participated today, all of today's presenters, and all members of our audience.